On behalf of EFAMA, I would like to welcome you to this webinar on ELTIF 2.0. I am delighted to see that this event has attracted much interest. We have 496 registered participants. I will keep my introduction very brief, as I'm sure you are eager to hear from the European Commission and from market participants who have kindly agreed to share their views and experiences with us. Let me just stress that EFAMA is very supportive of the new ELTIF regime. We have been actively involved in the ELTIF review at both level 1 and level 2. And I would like to thank my colleague Gwen for leading our efforts in that space with the great help and expertise of our members, many of whom are on the call today. Gwen will be giving the concluding remarks at the end of this webinar. Also, I would like to commend the European Commission for the very high quality of the review, including a robust set of level 2 rules, which will support the revised ELTIF rulebook. EFAMA is very optimistic about the new ELTIF regime and its future success. We are determined to promote this new investment vehicle. So you can certainly expect more EFAMA events on ELTIFs going forward. Also, we intend to provide all ELTIF managers with a platform to share views and ask questions. If you are an ELTIF manager and want to find out how EFAMA can support your work or answer your questions, please do drop us an email to eltif-manager@efama.org and we will respond. Today's webinar will consist of a keynote speech and 2 panel discussions. The first panel will look at the revised regime, its impact on the EU real economy and its reach outside of Europe. It will be moderated by Martin Parks, Managing Director and co-head of EU Public Policy at BlackRock. And the second panel will look at how to incentivize retail and institutional investor participation and be moderated by Peter Legwitt, partner at Simmons & Simmons. I will let the moderators introduce their panelists in due course. But first, I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, Martin Merlin, Director at the European Commission. As most of us will know, Martin plays a key role in EU financial services regulation and has been playing such a role for many years. He held several senior positions at the European Commission, be it in DG FISMA or at cabinet level. Since September this year, he's heading DG FISMA Director Red C in charge of financial markets. Martin, thank you so much for agreeing to share your views on the new ELTIF regime with us, and we look forward to engaging with you in your new role. And now I'm pleased to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanguy. Thank you for the introduction and for this invitation to deliver a keynote address at this conference. As you know, as part of the Capital Markets Union project, the EU enacted the ELTIF regulation in 2015. The ambition was to unlock private capital for long-term projects and to promote smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth. However, as you know as well, the original ELTIF framework faced a number of hurdles and did not take off successfully. The scope of eligible assets was seen as too narrow and the fund rules were too rigid and unattractive. There were hurdles for investors, which hampered investor confidence and access to ELTIFs. As a result, fewer than 50 ELTIFs were authorized when we launched the review in 2020, falling short of the initial ambition. The Commission therefore launched a thorough review of the framework, aiming at Unlocking the Opportunities of ELTIFs. This review culminated in the revised ELTIF framework and the adoption of the ELTIF technical standards in July 2024, paving the way towards the completion of the ELTIF legislative reform. So let me recap the key achievements of the ELTIF 2.0 reform. First, expanded scope of eligible assets. ELTIFs can now invest in a wider array of assets, including real estate, infrastructure projects, other collective investment undertakings, publicly listed companies, and even STS securitization. These investments can be carried out virtually at any capital structure level, equity, debt, convertible debt, and quasi-equity level, and through loans. Second, a global investment mandate. ELTIFs can pursue global investment strategies and invest almost anywhere in the world, except for a few jurisdictions seen as highly risky from an AML standpoint or seen as non-cooperative from a tax standpoint. Third, the restrictions on investment concentration have been eased, allowing for more concentrated portfolios. Fourth, ELTIFs can now have more viable level of leverage, notably up to 50% of the NAV for retail ELTIFs and up to 100% for professionals-only ELTIFs. Fifth, fund managers now enjoy greater flexibility in virtually any aspect of ELTIF structuring and operation, including portfolio composition, borrowing strategies, life cycle management, and co-investment strategies. Sixth, the enhanced flexibility of ELTIFs is illustrated by ELTIFs master feeder funds provisions and the possibility of ELTIFs to pursue a 100% fund of funds investment strategy. Next, the possibility to launch semi-liquid ELTIFs, which allow investors to redeem their capital before the end of life of ELTIFs and to pursue evergreen investment strategies. Lastly, we took care of investor protection, of course. All this progress has been achieved bearing in mind the interests and concerns of the most important persons, namely the investor. To that end, co-legislators have incorporated multiple investor safeguards, including a MiFID II suitability assessment, among other safeguards. ELTIFs are not in themselves a mainstream retail investment product, and it is important that ELTIFs do not end in the hands of retail investors from whom ELTIFs are not suitable. The above mentioned changes position ELTIF 2.0 as a catalyst for more growth and more competitiveness in the EU. ELTIFs democratize retail investing by opening the door to new asset classes and investment strategies, which have been previously reserved for institutional investors only. Already today, ELTIFs provide access to long-term capital, which is crucial for infrastructure projects, innovative startups, and SMEs, especially those in sectors with limited access to traditional bank loans. ELTIFs offer companies an alternative to bank financing, something that is needed to make our economy more robust, a point emphasized notably in the Letta and Noyer reports. And in that regard, we have come across different showcases of successful ELTIF investments, ranging from renewables and biotechs to investing in EU SMEs. And finally, ELTIFs are well suited to finance projects supporting sustainable infrastructure and clean technology projects. Now, of course, taxation remains a delicate topic. And on that, we hope that most member states will recognize the need to incentivize investors to use more the ELTIF vehicle so that it can deliver on its full potential and one day achieve, we hope, mass market status. Beyond taxation, there are some actions and market developments that could further support the ELTIF reform. One point of consideration is the extent to which ELTIFs could be marketed through the inclusion in the envelopes of insurance products. Another point is the popularization of ELTIFs distribution in third countries, akin to UCITS. And furthermore, at this stage, we do not discard the idea that when the ELTIF industry is large and mature enough, there might be sufficient interest in and appetite for the public listing of ELTIFs. Let me now conclude. It is time now for the European asset management industry to seize this opportunity by tailoring their investment strategies to deliver high-value propositions to investors across the EU, streamlining distribution networks and IT systems, and of course, launching new ELTIFs. National supervisors should do their part by ensuring sound supervision and the proper application of the new regulatory regime, ensuring particularly a high level of investor protection. And finally, national authorities should continue their reflections on whether and how to promote ELTIFs domestically. ELTIFs will be more successful, obviously, if in addition to Luxembourg, Irish, French, and Italian ELTIFs, we have ELTIFs domiciled in all or most of our member states. So we all have still work to carry out so that we can harness the full potential of ELTIFs, channeling private capital into long-term projects in need of financing, and building, thanks to that, a more sustainable, competitive, and prosperous Europe. I thank you for your invitation again. Thank you for listening, and I wish you very good discussions in the coming hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin, for that really generous overview of what the Commission was trying to do with the ELTIF. We're now going to move into our first panel session. As Tanguy mentioned, I'm Martin Parks. I'm co-head of EU Public Policy, but from an EFAMA perspective, I have the pleasure and honor of chairing EFAMA's Fund Regulation Committee, and we've been very heavily involved with the development of ELTIF in the last few years, and we're absolutely delighted to see the end of this ELTIF 2 process, and really excited to be looking forward to all the different types of ELTIFs that can be launched. But to give you some sense of what is coming up, this first panel will look at a number of issues around the investment options and structuring options. Our second panel will look more at the distribution and the investor protection angle. So forgive me if I don't touch so much on those. But first of all, I'd like to just introduce my four panelists, and a hint if we can all come on screen at this point. So first of all, we have Ivan Kuznetsov in the European Commission, who's actually going to take us into a bit more detail around what the ELTIF 2 regulation actually provides for, the opportunities that the Commission has pushed forward. Martin has given us a fantastic overview, but there's a lot more in there on the investment side, on the structuring side, which people should be aware of. And I know EFAMA has received a number of comments from the industry. Can we really do this? Was this the actual intention? So Ivan is going to take us through that. And then we're going to move on to a wider panel discussion with 3 industry participants. Loredana Carletti, who is Head of Business and Product Head of Real Assets at Amundi. We're going to have Peter Sankey, who's Product Manager at Schroders, who's going to talk not only on the EU side, but also at the end give a couple of reflections on what has been happening outside the EU, notably in the UK. And Christelle Charles-Bahal, who's Head of Investment Risk at Neuberger Berman, who's going to give us another view, rather than a product view, is going to give us an investment risk view of the opportunities that ELTIF brings us. So, Ivan, shall we start with you? Martin gave us some of the background about the policy goals of moving on from the initial ELTIF vehicle. How successful do you feel that the ELTIF 2 regulation has been in terms of the additional flexibility and in terms of how the ELTIF vehicle can be useful in achieving the longer term goals of the Savings and Investment Union, which forms such a key part of the Commission's ambitions for Capital Markets Union?
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I gather that ELTIFs 2.0 would definitely be more successful than ELTIF 1.0. Once again, if we look at where we've started our journey in 2015, it's a day and night in comparison to the sheer scope of flexibilities and attractiveness of the ELTIF brand for both investors and the asset managers alike. So when we started the reform, as my colleague Martin Merlin has described, there was a number of limitations. So what we've done over the reform, we've labeled them roughly as supply and demand side limitations. And those factors were making it extremely unattractive for both asset managers and investors to access and to use this vehicle for structuring the investments. So if I speak about the supply side limitations, we had the restrictive scope of eligible assets, a very rigid diversification and composition requirements, very low level of allowed leverage. So those supply factors hindered the flexibility and the attractiveness of the vehicle. So on the demand side, we had a bit of similar but somewhat different dynamics. We had a certain limitations such as 10,000 euros entry ticket and 10% sort of requirement that was calculated as part of the exposure to financial assets. And those were initially designed, of course, as investor protection safeguards, but were proven to act rather than like investment hurdles. Now, what really is important is that back then we failed to deliver on that mission. But as Martin Merlin has explained, many changes have been carried out in order to really look under the hood of every single provision, every single hurdle that sort of we faced, and to make a step towards market-driven, incentive-driven solution. So what we've done very hard is to make legislation that made sense. We need to remember that ELTIF is a fund wrapper, right? It's a voluntary product, so no one can force the asset manager to launch an ELTIF, and there are many other alternatives, many other possibilities out there, right? So what was really important is to take into account the attractiveness, the market-driven incentives, but also, and that was really the fundamental approach during the reform, to look at two sort of sensitivities, which became very clear, clear early on in the process, and that was the underlying theme throughout the ELTIF negotiations and the completion of the level 2 measures, the technical standards, that there would be a lot of sensitivities around protection. So what really made it is to strike the right balance. We needed to make sure that the new vehicle would be attractive, but at the same time ensured the very high level of investor protection. And please blink twice because I can speak uncontrollably about the topic.
No, go ahead. Ivan, thanks for that introduction. One of the things that Martin just mentioned, and I think a number of our listeners will be really, people viewing the webinar will be sort of really interested in just having the confirmation on. Martin mentioned the RTS had been adopted in July. It'd be really useful, I think, if you could just confirm whether there are any objections that have been received, or whether that process is now fully at its end, and actually what this is, this has been a long process. There's been a long, constructive dialogue between industry, Commission, and ESMA in producing that. But it would be, I think, it would be really useful for everybody to know about what were we trying to achieve collectively in these RTS, and what has actually been delivered.
Right, many questions there. So starting from the very first one, so I've been trying to frantically refresh my mailbox yesterday and today, and I can confirm that unless I have some virus, there is no information on or any indication of either the scrutiny or the extension of the scrutiny. So that means that really the next step would be the publication, right? So we've already reached out to the publications office to see when the publications will take place, but it will take place shortly. So, and once again, the way how the ELTIF regulation is structured, so you have the entry into force and application at the same date. We really twisted ourselves in a pretzel to make sure that there is no sort of time that is wasted. So, and there is an accelerated entry into application clause in the level 2 act. So please pick up on any of the questions that I will be missing, I guess. But what really is important is to, the opportunity that ELTIFs offer. We need to take a step back and sort of look at where ELTIFs are in terms of positioning themselves in the market, right? They're not a new product, but they act as a wrapper, right? This is an EU vehicle, EU sort of label that allows the national funds to get distributed. And what is really important is that there are around 930, around 1 trillion euros worth of retail assets, and those sort of funds, retail AIFs, are within the member states normally launched by the asset managers and marketed within the local jurisdictions of the original domicile, and that is very inefficient. Sort of that's really not corresponding to the capital markets vision that we would have. And of course, there is a massive untapped opportunity here. So once again, what people get really wrong sometimes is that ELTIF should not be seen as a competition. It doesn't act as a substitute, but really it enhances the advantages of the national fund structures, because it gives them the opportunity through this wrapper to give a very sort of clear, predictable set of EU rules, and those rules will allow you to have very flexible fund rules, transparency, operation, as well as a very high level of investor protection for your investor base, and very importantly, the opportunity to market ELTIFs to investors, not only within your original sort of domicile, but to the EU investors throughout the entire EU, thus reaping the advantages of the single market. Now, of course, you've also touched upon, and this is an interesting dimension of how big ELTIFs can become. I do feel that it's the time will show, right? What we really need to do is to distinguish where we are in terms of sort of which time horizon we're talking about. Short term, I feel that it's undisputed that the most important is for the industry to do its job, right? We're talking about the streamlining of distribution channels, IT interoperability. Very important for me personally is distributor and investor education. I can't
Looks as if we might have just lost. Oh, yes, there you are. You're back. I think you're back. We might have.
Right. Thank you. So what is really important is to make sure that we have the emphasis on the distribution channels, the interoperability, the distribution and invest education. But this development should not only take place at EU level, but also at national levels. So many times we've spoken with asset managers and stakeholders across Europe, and we've realized that there is a very uneven and surprisingly poor understanding of the ELTIFs and its opportunities. So this must change. I feel that it's really the time for sort of in the short term for the industry to do its part. And of course, medium term, you know, Martin Merlin has outlined some of the possibilities of where it goes or where it can go. But it takes time, right? It takes time for the ELTIFs to get established. I feel it really boils down to gaining trust, because gaining trust as such, right, takes time. I'm talking about the trust of the asset managers. The ELTIF must be time-proven vehicle of choice for the asset managers. It takes time, and the trust of investors to make sure that ELTIF is capable to generate long-term, risk-adjusted returns, at the same time a high level of investor protection, and the trust of the regulators, passing at least through 1 or 2 market cycles. And over time, as the trust and market confidence grow, it will undoubtedly make result in a very incredible transformation, and that transformation in turn will fuel the good outcomes, not only for the EU economy, but definitely will support the competitiveness of the EU asset management industry.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that run through. I think that is really helpful. I think we all subscribe to the importance of education, as education of the asset management industry, education in distributors, education discussion with and expectations and understanding with national supervisors. So there's in terms of expectations and understanding. I think this underlines a lot of the product development work and what we're going to talk to in the next session. I also sort of really liked your comment about this reminding people this is a label on existing products, and in some ways, because you've got this passport, it allows you to turbocharge what you have. It allows you to move forward. And then finally, as a sort of veteran of product development launches, whenever you have a new vehicle, there is always adjustment. There is always time to spare. There is an awful lot of activity under the surface that happens before you suddenly get this swell this swell of new products moving forward. And I think this is very much what is happening at the moment, and this is what I hope my other panelists are going to be able to talk about. Ivan, please stay with us. We're going to have a discussion with other industry participants, but I'm going to come back to you at the end for some further reflections on what they've been saying. So moving on to my panelists, I'm going to start with first of all with Loredana, picking up on Ivan's comments about the ELTIF unlocking a new wave of investment opportunities. Where are you as Amundi in the process of designing new products, and what are the sort of features, the invest market segments that you're seeing as most promising at this stage?
Hi Martina. First of all, thanks to you for this invitation. Thanks to EFAMA for the invitation. I listened very attentively Ivan's intervention, and I would like to maybe share only 3 comments on 3 points. One of the eligible assets, the second one is only domiciliation of ELTIF, and the third one maybe sharing some thought around the challenge that is still in front of us to develop ELTIF in Europe. The first one is with the new regime, it's sure that ELTIF 2.0 is providing us more flexibility flexibility when we setting up and manage a ELTIF. There is more clarity around the eligible assets, and one of the major point that is important on our view is the possibility to invest indirectly through funds now. These open the opportunity to implement a strategy, for example, in secondary market that was not possible before. And by multiplying the model of intervention in private market, we have a broad and investable universe without a significant increase in cost or developing timeline for the ramp-up period of the ELTIF. This is an important point for private clients in particular, because enhance the diversification and reduce the ramp-up timeline. That is a very important point, in particular for private investor. This allowed us to consider a broadened way to create a ELTIF. For example, thinking around ELTIF with a geographic thematic focus, or with, for example, investment through co-investment, allowing us to think to aggregate a different source of capital to a single opportunity of a fund. These by co-investment, we are allowed to have a different fund co-investing and reducing the minimum investment amount for each fund, and the other side to more tailor-made the portfolio with respect of the specific target market of each ELTIF funds. About the domiciliation, ELTIF, as per our view, is an European opportunity. But nevertheless, at Amundi, we have already experienced the creation of national ELTIF, local ELTIF, usually because of a specific focus on the distribution of or on the investment. This is a complementary solution for us to propose investment products to our client, and also considering that as of today, and as already mentioned, there is not a perfect uniformity in terms of taxation for investor. So it could be sometime appropriate to think to local solution for investor, and not only to have a pan-European product distributed largely across different countries. Another point that I would like to share with you is the challenges that remain in front of us, in particular for asset manager, that are sometimes not only technical, not only a regulatory challenge, but also operational challenge. For example, we need to adapt our offer. Private product usually are structured on capital call. So each investor is invest continuously in the fund based on an initial commitment. But for private investor, this is not possible. So we need to adapt the strategy, the classic private market strategy, to our investor. But there is a client segment in the mid of a private client and institutional client that could be also interested to have a capital call mechanism. This is something that is not so easy to manage, because operationally we need to build up a framework to allow to securitize this kind of subscription process. Also to automatize the subscription process, because usually in private market funds is quite a laborious, intensive investment process and very paper-based usually. So is another challenge is this automatization of the subscription process. And the main point for me, the main challenge for us is to management the matching mechanism in the short term or medium term for ELTIF fund. This is definitely in the secondary system, the liquidity for ELTIF funds. This mechanism exists already in some countries, but are very specific and not very well known. But I believe that now with the ELTIF 2.0, we have the opportunity to create a matching mechanism, a secondary market for ELTIF that it could be very beneficial for our investor.
Loredana, thank you very much for running through some of the investment opportunities, especially those around co-investment, but also some of the scale up and operational challenges that the industry collectively will have to face. Moving on to Peter, from your perspective at Schroders, are you coming across similar challenges, but also very interested to hear from your perspective where you see the real opportunities for growth and meeting client demand come from?
Thanks, Martin, and yeah, thanks to everyone who's spoken so far. It's been an interesting discussion. So yeah, to answer, I think the best place to start is we're definitely exploring the best way to broaden our ELTIF offering, looking at a number of options and opportunities, a number of asset classes, both cross-border and also in specific regional markets, in response to sort of tactical demand where we see it. In terms of features, we really recognise that the ELTIF provides a structural framework with a number of features suited to both retail and professional clients, and really looking to leverage that, and certainly leverage that in our first ELTIF vintage, which is invested in private equity. I think typically ELTIFs are fundamentally designed to support long-term investments, which aligns predominantly with typical investment horizons for private markets. This allows pursuit of value creation strategies, which would normally take a number of years to materialise, but as we found with our first vintage, it's especially important for private equity, where strategies have life cycles of 5 to 10 years. And that was definitely a factor in designing our first ELTIF, and is being considered as we look at new products too. Further to that, I would say providing access for retail investors is very important, but what's equally important is to consider investor suitability and making distinctions between different types of investors, as Loredana kind of pointed to. Obviously, we read about concerns of opening up private markets to retail investors, and we're supportive of this as long as it's done in the right way and with appropriate education, which I think we touched on probably later on in the second panel. But fundamentally, we don't think that private investors should be deprived of the investment opportunities so long as the fund is structured properly and appropriately and investors are suitably advised. The ELTIF rules place important guardrails around this, and we think product design should reflect this to make ELTIFs as functional as possible. So I touched on our first ELTIF vintage a little bit, and that was a closed-ended strategy with a fixed term. But we are also interested in potential for evergreen ELTIFs. As Martin and other speakers have said, the ELTIF rules, specifically the RTS, now that it's published, have allowed for more flexible redemption policies and effectively permit evergreen structures, similar to what we're seeing in the UCI Part 2 space, which are currently in the market as we speak. We think when fully ramped up, an investment into one of these an evergreen ELTIF, such as what I've just sort of set out, can offer immediate exposure to an asset class whilst providing investors the flexibility to tailor their overall allocation, which we think is to their benefit, and something that's quite different from what the original ELTIF rules allowed. So yeah, structured appropriately and with investors that have a good understanding of the asset class and investments in the fund, we think evergreen ELTIFs can play quite an important role in facilitating better access for investors. And again, similar to what Loredana said, not just retail investors. For example, we've had pension funds, insurance companies, and family offices which have invested into our evergreen funds due to the operational simplicity of the vehicles versus what would be a typical LP GP structure. So this was especially notable for our first ELTIF vintage fundraise. Whilst it's a Luxembourg domiciled vehicle with distribution efforts primarily focused in those sort of big EU markets like France, Spain, Italy, and other popular jurisdictions, we did receive some sort of ex-EU or outside EU interest as well, where the simplified fund terms were really helpful for distributing to both wealth and professional investors. So yeah, whilst the ELTIF regulatory framework is really relevant for the EU, the fund design, which is sort of influenced by that framework, can be relevant outside the EU as well, which makes it quite interesting in other markets too. So yeah, given that feedback we've had from the market, we are exploring how future ELTIFs and evergreen funds can be sold to clients, well, suitable clients in other regions such as Asia, where that market could be a benefit. So that ability to market and those funds could be a benefit. Finally, just touching on some of the challenges which persist. Some, I would say, are around sales, which I imagine will probably be touched on a bit later on. But one of the key operational ones we have found is related to distribution platforms, noting that some platforms we've worked with have issues coping with funds that provide NAVs on a monthly or less basis. Though I think as more and more ELTIFs are launched, we'll see development and continued development in this space. So hopefully that will be an issue which is less prevalent in the future.
Thank you, Peter, for that run through and a thoughtful view of some of many of the thoughts that I think are going through managers' heads in really sort of successful ELTIF launches. Christelle, I'd love to pass over to you now on some of your thoughts. As clearly, this is this sits between your traditional institutional investor and your retail fund. In your world, how are you looking at the sort of investment opportunity? What this means, and what are the considerations that you're most focused on?
Sure. Thank you, Martin, and good afternoon, everyone. So I believe every speaker has already mentioned that the new framework definitely opening up new opportunities into the space of long-term investment. I think what the current new framework also is offering is a consistent level playing field for all the participants, and especially when we start considering the evergreen solution, which is probably where some of the opportunities for accessing intermediary and retail client is. So when we think about the product development process, it's obviously the opportunities in terms of security type, and we've heard co-investment, we heard primary, so that's definitely some of the initial candidates for those early stage new regime structure. But I think it's also who are the investor we're dealing with, and in those opportunities, if you are merging a long-term experience in private investment for your institutional investor, along with your experience with the more public traditional businesses, there are a few works to be doing as well to unlock those potential and investment. The first is really going to be helping our partners modeling those type of opportunity in the context of a broad asset allocation, because as we've indicated, your investors are going to come into a longer horizon investment and with limited liquidity. So when you're constructing your overall portfolio, those are factors that you have to take into account. So that means we have, as an asset manager, we're here to provide the support not only from an investment perspective, so understanding what are the interests of the outcome into a diversified portfolio, and what are the type of opportunities that are available for your investor, but also understanding operationally what that means and the risk that could come with it. So as I've mentioned, so we definitely have now the opportunity to bring to additional participants in the market some of the private investments, so like the primary and the co-investment. It's probably not going to be a straight line development, and both Peter and Loredana has mentioned. One of the challenge that we faced initially is when you like to passport is the challenge around the different tax regime across the EU. So the products, depending on the jurisdiction, are there, but the passporting is still a bit going through some hurdles. And as we go along, also they are probably a little more complex strategies that could be of interest and more niche, but some of the challenges into how those opportunities are structured underneath, they also can have some challenges to be integrated. But I think time will tell how we can improve. What is interesting with some of the initiative we're discussing it's on the back of the UCITS and the IEFM success. They are definitely interested outside of the EU as well to utilize the ELTIF as a solution to provide access to those investment, specifically on the global intermediary. So we have engagement in Asia and in Latin America as well, and that's really on the back of the success of what the UCITS and the EFAMA has been offered for many years. So they are interested broadly on the structure.
Christelle, that's really interesting. And just I'll use that to sort of move on to our next round with a couple more questions. I think it's very interesting. A number of the panelists have mentioned the sort of third country interest, and I think that's it's sort of all praise to the many years of UCITS where countries have got around the world have got comfortable with the EU structures. Very interesting to hear a little bit more about what type of strategies the third country investors are interested in, and then perhaps, if I may, I'd like to come back a little bit on some of the. You've mentioned the co-investment. One of the other sort of second question back to you would be on in terms of accessing private markets. Often one of the big access routes is, rather than necessarily by direct investment, is through fund of funds. And if you've got some thoughts around the new rules around fund of funds qualifying portfolio undertakings, I think that could also be quite useful.
So in terms of outside of EU, I would say, I mean, the interest reside with what we can offer. The new, I mean, the ELTIF 2.0 is still new to EU members, so even more outside, even if a lot of them have been keeping an eye on the development, but also as a participant, we also have obviously to keep into context our obligation under MiFID, under IEFM, and if there is interest for more sustainability integration on the SFDR, which is usually also bring complexity when you bring all those acronyms together into the product and the type of assets you are dealing with. That makes you a lot of drawing onto your product design. So I think for the moment, the product are going to be probably on the simple side of what we can do, but that's already a good start, because keep in mind that most of the investor that we have in mind, they had no access to those opportunities that have been growing and have an interest into a diversified portfolio. So I would say we'd rather start with simple plain vanilla, and co-investments are where we see some of the most interest initially. And some of the work also, as I mentioned, is really about thinking for us as the manufacturer, what is the product that's going to be fitting into the liquidity features that we want to offer, because we need to balance here the outcome that we wish for our investor and that we are aiming for the investor, but also ensuring that we put into the market a product that is suitable for those investors, which have been flagged already. So it's identifying really what we think is valuable also. So is it worth really putting on the market a product where you probably have to sit on 40% of highly liquid assets just to have lesser liquidity? So it's also discussing with our partners, explaining why the liquidity term might sound very strict, but in fact they are here because we are aiming to deliver a certain objective into the fund. So really, I think what those part of the RTS have been recognizing is that there is an opportunity for a broad range of investors to access those markets and to access those opportunity, but also really recognizing the unique features of the underlying assets, and probably as an industry we've learned from events in the past. So I think when we put liquidity into the context, there's two letters in ELTIF. The L and the T means long term. So I think it really makes sense to have that thought process around the liquidity term. And what it does also is opening up opportunities for more integrating more public-private solution, because depending on your size and like mentioned by Loredana, you have different type of participant into the interested into those investment, and for some smaller actor, they might have an interest of having something a little bit more diversified, and that's when you can start bringing those public-private mandate and solution developed for an investor.
Thank you so much. That's a fascinating view of the of what we've all been thinking through. Loredana, looking back to you, Martin Merlin mentioned some of the specific types of projects that ELTIFs could invest in. As we sort of continue this sort of investment process, would you be able to sort of just bring this to life for people thinking about how do we talk about how ELTIFs actually finance the economy? What sort of specific investments do existing in ELTIFs invest in? Just so we can sort of visualize what the potential.
Starting by what Christel said, the magic formula between time and return and risk, we try to elaborate around this. So one of the important points that is at our view is as I mentioned already, the direct possibility to have a direct investment allowed us to have a more broadened way to put together a strategy, and it's important to make sure that market sector, when we invest, is appropriate for the size of the fund, in particular when we want to propose something that is not so strategic, generalistic strategy in the private market. As per our view, this could be also a way to interest investor outside of Europe. We can maybe propose something that is more thematic with respect of a sector of the real economy in Europe. In Amundi, we have experience, for example, of proposing ELTIF that are focused on a specific industry sector in a specific country, in food, for example. This could be also an argument for interest to have an investor outside Europe to be interested. Another element that for me is important if we want to develop the ELTIF outside Europe is to consider that now with ELTIF 2.0, the minimum threshold of investment in liquid assets is 55%. Could be an idea to think about to use also this flexibility to put together funds that is very focused on a sector, on a geography, on a market, a sort of vertical slice of the real economy that is focused on geographically or by sector. It could be also an argument to have not only access to private market. I agree completely with Christel that a private investor maybe are less interested to have a focus. They are more interested to have a liquidity. We need to pay attention to make sure that what our offer is compatible with the suitable for this kind of client. But another way also to think is how we can put together funds, an ELTIF fund that could interest investor outside of the constraint of investment. If I may, another point that is very interesting for me, I skipped the discussion because Christelle and Peter also developed this around the fund or co-investment. It's also now the possibility to invest in real assets that are no more limited to a minimum size of 10 million euro. This is another element that is quite interesting if we want to promote strategy for our smaller scale social industry infrastructure, for example, or to have the possibility to invest in assets like intellectual property. So the idea is now to develop not only the technical solution for the investment for a private client, but also to try to innovate in terms of strategy and focus on real assets on the private market that we want to propose to our investors, to let them to choose, because once again, Christelle mentioned this is a long-term investment. So an investor that are managing its own saving maybe want to focus the saving to a specific sector because he's believing of the development on the long term of this sector. And
may I interrupt you there? Because actually, have you watched the people in the this is a webinar. People can put questions in, and so one of the questions that come in is almost. I just wanted to interrupt you because it was almost really on. It was really so to the point. Sort of one of the questions from somebody in the audience was, would you see the ELTIF as a solution to attract new retail investors to new geographical sectors, such as investing in Africa, for example, which would normally have been seen as too risky, too complicated. So it was you were very close. You're very close to answering that. So I thought I'd just throw the question in as we're moving through. Sorry to
no problem at all.
unexpectedly.
To comment on this, I was more thinking about investment from outside Europe. It's important for us, but on the other side, indeed, the clarity and the bring by ELTIF 2.0 is now allowing us to think to invest in third countries, non-European countries, with more definition of what could be possible, not be possible. Martin also mentioned the fact that the eligible country for the domiciliation of the target investment is now definitely easier to manage. But on the other side, we are still speaking about investment in the private market. So it's not a public market. In order to be allowed to have a global investment, we need to make sure that we are not so far for the target investor in order to have the possibility to monitor the development of our investment. It could be easier maybe for infrastructure. It could be easier for real assets, but on the other side, to intervene, for example, in capital, in private equity or private debt, I believe that we need to make sure that we are not going so far from our expertise when we want to develop something more exotic.
Thank you, Peter. Moving on to you, sort of be really interested here to hear from you for some of your reflections around the investment opportunities, and then perhaps as a second question, I'll come back to you on some questions around are there remaining barriers at a national level. But to start with on the investment side.
Yeah, so on the investment side, I mean, the ELTIF 2.0 regulations obviously opened up the pool of sort of eligible investments that could be made. I mean, anecdotally, our first ELTIF was actually planned under the original regime as a closed-ended strategy, but was launched as the regime was announced back in 2023, and we're able to actually incorporate some of the ELTIF 2.0 investment guidelines and eligible asset restrictions into the prospectus at the time. So actually what we were able to do is introduce that additional flexibility into asset allocation, which allowed the maximum investment in single assets to be raised from 10 to 20%, for example. And also, interestingly, we've also allowed us to leverage increased flexibility to invest into EUAs. And we made an initial investment into one of our European direct private equity EFAs, which is typically designed for institutional investors. And what benefit that was, it gave immediate exposure to a portfolio of about 8 companies, providing quite an early performance uplift for the fund. So that was quite an interesting way, is being reactive to the updated ELTIF regulations actually allowed us to sort of develop the strategy of our existing fund as we move forward. I mean, typically our first strategy that I've talked about is a directly invested strategy. But what's also quite interesting in the ELTIF 2.0 is, rather than just having that sort of single fund allocation, you can actually also launch pure fund of fund strategies, provided no individual fund exceeds 20% of the total portfolio, which I think has potential to unlock a number of interesting structural opportunities and potential for greater diversification, as you're able to access a broader range of underlying strategies from a single portfolio. I think it's also, I know Loredana and Christelle touched on this as well, but there's also a broader range of assets on the private credit side, certain types of corporate and commercial loans and securitized debts which weren't envisaged under the original regulation, which I think are quite exciting opportunities as well, especially with private debt being such an in focus asset class at the moment.
So I might throw another question that's just come in, which I think fits in with this, and but please others the panel jump in if you've got thoughts of this. This is quite an interesting view about the way the evergreen ELTIF can potentially move out the scope of investment opportunities. So the question was, do you think evergreen ELTIF structures are also more appropriate for holding VC type strategies with a sort of longer holding, which need a longer holding period than the sort of typical closed-ended 7 to 10 sort of private equity type lockup periods, so giving you more flexibility to link into longer term holding strategies?
I think it's a good question. I know, for example, with VC investments that, as you say, 10, 12 years or potentially even longer could be sort of would be when you're looking at distributions and actually having some exits from those assets. So, and I know that, for example, some of the, for ELTIFs where they are, where they have a maturity of longer than 10 years, you need to make specific disclosure. And we've also found that in conversations with clients and distribution partners that actually, when you start looking above that 10-year threshold, some investors are less keen to invest because it's effectively locking their capital up for longer, especially in the retail space. So I mean, it's an interesting suggestion, certainly. I think with VC, because it's a very liquid asset class, you want to be very careful about sort of how you design the fund and structure the redemption policy to make sure that you aren't offering liquidity which doesn't exist. But I think, yeah, it's a very interesting suggestion, certainly. I don't know if Loredana or Christelle have anything to add.
Yeah, no, I mean, that would be, from what you touch upon, is going to be how you design it, and if the appetite of your investor is to have monthly on a 5 years horizon, they're probably not going to get the best outcome from a VC. So it's always having that balance, and what we were saying from an education point of view, understanding what are the opportunities, the outcome, and what makes sense in terms of solution for that, with permitting the access, but like being very clear on the optimal design for an investor to get the most of it.
If I may just comment on this, because we are so used to speak about evergreen, but as per my point of view, an ELTIF is not exactly an evergreen product, it's a semi-liquid product. So coming back to what Christelle and Peter also are suggesting, the idea is to make sure that we educate and we present correctly our product to the investor, because it's not only the frequency of the redemption that is important to take in consideration for our investor, it's also the level of the liquidity. For me, the ELTIF represent the third way of product. We have open-ended and we have closed-ended fund. We have in some countries a concept of evergreen, so open-ended fund that are invested in liquid assets. So with ELTIF, we are in a different way. We are a fund that are proposing a limited liquidity with a pre-established way level and frequency, and is managing the illiquid investment through the cycle. And of course, the VC is less suitable, less easy to manage than a large leverage loan for strategy, for example, in terms of liquidity. But once again, for the investor, there is not only the technique behind the fund, how we can make sure that what we promise in terms of liquidity is respected, but also to currently understand that there is not an evergreen fund that they can go in and go out when they want, but is a long-term investment allowing emergency exit, but is because it's offering a limited liquidity, and the liquidity is limited to the portfolio construction. So it's important to make sure that there is a correct communication with our distributor partners, and in particular for clients, in particular when we have not very sophisticated investors that want to access to the fund.
Well, thanks for coming back in such detail on the questions. And then normally when we do panels, we get everybody looks at each other and doesn't jump in to answer questions. So fantastic to have 3 answers to that question. Before I go back to a couple more of the questions, I think I've got just perhaps a couple of minutes from each of you on what you see as some of the sort of remaining rollout barriers. And we've touched on some of the potential barriers, whether that's how do you need to do structuring to get advantage of local tax advantages, or the eligibility of national wrappers, for example. Peter, perhaps just continuing with you, seeing what you're seeing. And the question that I know a number of people ask is in comparison with the ELTIF, is the ELTAF in the UK, the long-term asset fund, and the same, pretty much the same vehicle, or are there specific differences or different markets people need to take into account?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the similarity of the acronyms and the names can lead to one conclusion, but I think it's key to note that both the ELTIF and the ELTAF share a similar goal in sort of top level with facilitating long-term investments into liquid assets, but they do operate under quite different regulatory regimes, which are tailored to their specific markets. I don't think they're competing products in any sense, but rather they serve the needs of investors in their specific jurisdictions. So the original 2015, I think it was, ELTIF regulation and 2021 ELTAF text were quite different. I mean, ELTIFs could only originally be closed-ended and distributed broadly to retail, whilst the original ELTAF regulation in the UK only permitted funds which offered regular liquidity, and which were primarily targeted at institutional investors, particularly in the DC space. So I think it's important to note that under ELTIF 2, it's the possibility to offer liquidity and sort of effectively to structure these funds as de facto semi-liquid funds has actually brought the regimes closer together. So I think that's quite important to know. But in terms of the complementarity of the 2 regimes, I think there could be opportunities to leverage both in some sort of feeder arrangement, as an ELTAF could potentially be used as an access vehicle for an ELTIF, which would broaden the reach of the ELTIF to other types of UK retail investors, which is permitted under the ELTAF rules. So I think that's quite an interesting possibility which can be explored. I don't think it would work so well the other way, because ELTIFs have to feed into other ELTIFs, but I think there are options, ways of sort of leveraging the 2 quite novel structures in a way which sort of makes the best of both worlds in a sense.
Thanks for that, and you've almost answered. We've given one example question to another of the questions which just came in about whether any of the participants had considered building up local feeder funds for retail and to invest in order to invest in ELTIF 2 vehicles. So you've given one example, but perhaps moving back to Christelle, whether you've any more thoughts on that point, or any more. What are barriers that are particularly concerning you?
I would say first, I mean, I think we all quite excited by the ELTIF 2.0. There are opportunities. I would think what we need now is having the framework staying consistent across the different national authorities, so we can really develop that product. And as we say, it's a long-term product, so we're going to need a couple of years to really see the impact of that, but it's important to have a framework that we know is consistent, that we can work with, and allowing the passporting, because that's also, if you think about some of the objective of the capital market unions, the passporting of those products is going to be a critical path as well. The other challenge that we're facing, and I'm probably going to be touched based on the next panel, but it's accelerating the operational setup around dealing with those new products. So as we say, they are semi-liquid, they come, and that means you're not getting a daily NAV of your product. So that comes also with a level of complexity in ensuring that you calculate the fair value accordingly. But that creates a bit of challenges when you bringing those products into a platform that's been used to be dealing with daily product, and the operational, it's usually what also slow down the development and access to the product. So a consistent framework and helping out with some of the operational setup, because I think we now have a good sandbox to play in.
Thank you. And Loredana, just 1 minute, because I would like to give Ivana a couple of minutes to respond to everything that we've been hearing. Is there sort of one or two sort of real barriers that you think need to be addressed?
No, nothing to add that has not already touched by Chriselle and Peter. For me, the master feeder structure in any case remains something that we need to consider if we want to adapt the offer to specific investor in specific countries. And it's quite interesting to consider this investment solution through the possibility to have, for example, a different liquidity constraint within different share class of the same fund. So it's something that we need to explore and we need to pay attention to. But at some time, to aggregate capital with different sources, mean that we need to pay attention how how we organize this. And the master feeder structure is a possible solution for a specific country or specific constraint. But not only. I hope that it will be not only the only one solution to adapt investment constraint in terms of, in particular, of liquidity.
Thank you. I'm afraid of the audience, we won't have been able to get through all the questions, but as Gwen mentioned, we do have ELTIF-manager at EFAMA.org, so we're going to take those questions away. And there's a fascinating range of questions, including African Gate, EU Gateway, and a number of other structuring points. But I'd really like to hand over to Ivan to finish off our session and give some final reflections back to us from what he's been listening to.
Thank you so much. I unfortunately will disappoint Martin. I was taking a lot of notes. I will probably take more than just 1 minute, but it's really a very thought-provoking and very necessary discussion.
That's your privilege.
to be had. Let me just kick off. While we had this discussion, I got the tentative confirmation that so the regulation, the RTS 2024-4991, will be published on the 25th of October. So that just came in. We are still, double checking. Please take it as tentative, but that's sort of you may probably can pencil it with red or pink color in your calendars. That's good news. I just want to pinpoint on to some of the issues that came across as very interesting. Loredana, you said that you had challenges on the implementation of the matching mechanisms. And I guess it really boils down. We know that the matching mechanism are the right. There is no obligation to implement the matching mechanism because it can create certain burdens, certain complexity. So I just want to make it sure, especially to those people in the audience that do not perceive it as yet another sort of obstacle to setting up an ELTIF. That's the right, to provide the extra liquidity. It's just sort of for the broader audience and those who are not sort of informed, rather than an obligation for every single asset manager to put in place those arrangements. I want to touch upon some of the and it probably boils down to the wording, because discussion was really around the strategies and how to make sure that the investment strategy of the particular asset managers works out. But it's really important to emphasize that ELTIFs indeed are designed to support the long-term investments. But when we talk about ELTIFs as long-term, we really need to understand that ELTIFs are much more than that. Really, it's super important to really go into detail of the enacting provisions and the recitals of the ELTIF regime, and painstakingly compare them to the previous edition. What I really want to make sure that ELTIFs are not deemed as solely, exclusively the conduits for channeling the investments in long-term projects. Because if you look at the scope of eligible assets, the investment universe, the sheer recognition that you can invest in STS securitizations, and use the short-term receivables that support the sort of long-term projects in themselves, all the deletions of the objectives of the investment, all the deletions of the provisions that relate the duration of the assets and the investment strategy, those were painstakingly removed to really broaden the flexibility. So while yes, indeed, the name remains to be the long-term investment fund regulation, but the versatility of this instrument is still yet to be discovered. And there are a lot of details that probably lawyers and regulators need to uncover. And I can't, at least emphasize enough the amount of energy and thought that went into trying to unlock the flexibility. We've talked about 100% fund of funds provisions, master feeder fund provisions, but think of, for instance, the carve-outs for professionals only ELTIFs. The sheer possibility of you designing a single asset professionals only ELTIF, that's kind of is something that I haven't come across, at least until I dealt with ELTIF. So I feel that really we're still on this discovery journey when it comes to really how to handicap the scope of flexibility. So Peter's points on the distribution platforms and the building the platforms, and some of the points were echoed by Christelle. I do feel that really that comes and the point is taken. It will boil down to investments. It will boil down to distributor education, to tailoring your documentation, and of course the heavy lifting of streamlining the distribution channels. I really scribbled down the point, and I want to bring out the point of Christelle. She emphasized the challenges and hurdles of passporting on at least a couple of occasions, and this is something that would immediately spark the the light bulb, the proverbial light bulb for us, in our capacity as the European Commission, because we emphasize often enough this provision that says that the member states shall not put in place national provisions in the area covered by the ELTIF regulation. So we cannot talk about national approaches to passportability when it comes to really want to make sure that there is legal and structuring work, and those instances that are deemed to be as hurdles to passporting, to exercising the right to passportability, that are brought to the attention of local regulators, ESMA, and ultimately ourselves. Because what we really need to do is to have a single market, right? Not the market consisting of several fragmented markets. And this is essential. So I can't emphasize this enough. And I promise I'll be quick. My final remark, I've pointed out that we have 930 odd billion euros worth of retail AIFs, and this is a large market opportunity, and it's not only opportunity to launch new ELTIFs, it's also the opportunity for existing national funds to take out the ELTIF authorization, and that really boils down to groundwork, to working within member states, with engaging with member states authorities. And really the way we see success is when ELTIFs are launched in many more member states and become really a go-to sort of vehicle throughout the EU. And while what we're doing now is we're working with FISMA, you know, we're supporting NCAs in their convergence work, and we'll be adopting some of the NCAs. So we're laser focused through this policy work to support ELTIFs, and we're happy to and grateful to EFAMA and all the panelists for this very important outreach, for this very important event. Thank you.
So, Ivan, thanks for those closing comments. Thank you for that comment about that the channels remain open for discussion. As I think I'm not going to put if I'm in the position of saying we're going to repeat this in 6 months' time, but it sounds like this continued dialogue would be extremely useful as we go through this exploratory and discovery phase. We're now I'd like to thank all the panelists, Ivan, Christelle, Loredana, Peter, for sharing their thoughts, being so open, being so thoughtful on this. As I mentioned, if I will take away the questions we weren't able to ask, we could have probably done another 40 minutes, but I imagine everybody now does want a coffee break or a reaction break. It's very tiring watching something quite so intense on a video screen. So we're going to break now. Please don't please do come back at 3:45, 15:45 if you're on UK time, 2:45, where we will continue with the next panel. But thank you very much. This has been a fascinating and really enjoyable panel session.
Welcome back everyone to the second half of our EFAMA webinar on the ELTIF 2.0. We'll be starting again now with our second and final panel discussion, where we will shift the focus and look at how best to incentivize investor participation in the ELTIF. To moderate this discussion, I will be passing the floor to Peter Leguit, who is a partner in the Asset Management and Investment Funds Group at Simmons & Simmons.
Thank you very much, Gwen. And a very warm welcome, everybody, to this second panel of the day. Indeed, it's a great pleasure to introduce our panel to you. Let me start, ladies first. We have Jocelyn Pidou. She's with iCapital, where she is the head of asset manager solutions for the EMEA region. Then we have Stéphane Blanchot of BNP Paribas Asset Management, and Stéphane is head of alternative solutions. And last but not least, we have with us Salvatore Sperna from Azimut Investments, and Salvatore is head of alternative investments. So I think I hope we have something nice for you. We're going to indeed focus on the investor side of things. So how do we facilitate investments? How do we incentivize investments into ELTIFs? We'll see some examples of how this is done in France and Italy. We're looking at distribution channels, like what distribution channels do we use? And of course, on the investor side, how do we need to educate our investors? How do we educate investors? And what role can technology play in all this? So we're going to do this not by way of Q&A, but we're going to do this with the aid of some propositions, statements that you or our panelists may or may not agree with, but we're going to have them and we'll have a little bit of a discussion around them. So I suggest we warm up with the first one. The first proposition that I'd like to put to the panel is the following. With the arrival of ELTIF 2.0, the ELTIF can finally be used as originally intended. So that's the first proposition. Stéphane, would you care to kick off on this one?
Happy to start. Good afternoon. Thanks, Peter. It's an interesting question, and just to give a bit of background and history from our own experience at BNP Paribas Asset Management, we launched a first ELTIF in 2016. and it was one of the first ELTIF in France. And at the time, we were considering ELTIF as a tool that could be very useful for distribution, but truth is, we use the ELTIF label to actually help on the direct lending side, because it was a time where we had questions around banking monopolies throughout Europe, and the ELTIF label, throughout a fund, throughout an AIF, enabled us to do direct lending from the fund. So from a distribution standpoint, it proved much harder, much for different reasons that we can elaborate on, and I think these points have been taken and addressed in the subsequent revision last year and this year. But at the time, when we looked at ELTIF, we used the label to help us in the direct lending. So things have changed tremendously, and I think the original intention, which was to broaden the scope of distribution, is about to be done and is addressed through the last revision. I agree with that.
Very good. So, Salvatore, how do you see that?
Yeah, maybe Peter, starting answering to your question. So I can confirm that ELTIF 2.0 has introduced finally some improvements that allow the fund to function as originally intended. I will maybe take the occasion as well to discuss about the things that have been implemented with the new regulation. So starting, for example, regarding the reduction of the minimum investment threshold, previously under ELTIF 1.0, retail investors faced a minimum investment amount of 10,000 euro, alongside as well with obligation to demonstrate adequate financial knowledge. Of course, this created a strong barrier and limited access, particularly for small retail investors. Finally, with ELTIF 2.0, we have seen that these have been lowered. So now asset managers can as well allow investors to access at nominal value of the share classes. For example, at Azimut, we decided to bring the limit at 1,000 euro, and therefore opening the market to a wider range of retail investors. Another key improvement is the increased flexibility in terms of portfolio construction. ELTIF 1.0 had, for example, stringent diversification requirements, such as limiting exposure to a single investment to 10% of the fund's total net capital, which sometimes forced us and other managers to over-diversify. Under ELTIF 2.0, these limits have been relaxed, allowing up to 20% exposure to a single investment. Therefore, now we have the possibility to create a more focused, higher potential portfolios, but still maintaining prudent risk management approach. Another possibility that has been introduced, and we have seen already in the last couple of months, several managers to launch ELTIF that are operating as fund of funds, and as well the possibility to use ELTIF as a feeder fund into other ELTIF. Another possibility as well is the increase of the leverage. So before, as managers, we had a limit of 30%. Now it has been brought to 50% of the capital for ELTIF reserved to retail clients, and up to 100% for ELTIFs instead reserved to professional ones. And personally speaking, I think that one of the most important changes relate to liquidity. Under ELTIF 1.0, funds were structured as strictly closed-ended, meaning that investors had to commit their capital until the end of the fund's life. Instead, with ELTIF 2.0, we have seen an introduction of the possibility of creating a semi-liquid structure through periodic liquidity windows, and therefore offering investors the option to redeem their shares at predetermined intervals. Therefore, while these funds remain largely long-term, this added flexibility is a significant enhancement, especially for retail investors who might have concern about locking up capital for extended periods. And lastly, with ELTIF 1.0, despite the fact that already before it was possible to invest in private equity and infrastructure space, now we have seen a broadened scope of eligible assets, in particular in sectors like real estate and sustainable projects. Therefore, just in a few words, with ELTIF 2.0, we have seen removals of barriers from the original framework, offering a lower entry threshold and greater portfolio flexibility and enhanced liquidity options.
Very good. I think I'll take that as a genuine agreement that with the statement that the ELTIF can indeed finally be used as it was originally designed to be. Which moves us, Salvatore, maybe you can stay with us to kick off on the next proposition, the second one, which is the following. The European Union has done its part, and now it's up to the national governments to promote the ELTIF, for example, through incentives. What do you say?
I totally agree. Maybe I take the occasion to speak about Italy. So as of today, we have 18 ELTIFs on the market. So we are a large asset manager that counts more or less 23% of the Luxembourg market, 15% of the European market. And in Italy, what we have seen is that while there has been some progress in promoting ELTIFs, there are still no specific tax incentives exclusively dedicated to them. Currently, ELTIFs benefit from the general tax advantages available to most private market funds, but according to my view, is not potentially enough to fully unlock their potential. Therefore, a key framework available in Italy to Italian retail investors is PIR, or so-called piani individuali di risparmio, which was introduced to encourage long-term investments by offering capital gains tax exemption for those who hold their investment for at least 5 years' time. However, as you can understand, to qualify for these benefits, there are pros and cons, because PIR funds must invest at least 70% of their assets in Italian companies, with further restriction as well on the size and type of businesses. Therefore, this structure, while on one side is beneficial for local investments, limits the flexibility of funds like ELTIF that aim for broader diversification, especially across European markets. Therefore, the PIR regime has indeed provided a boost for retail investors in Italy looking to support local businesses, but it creates a challenge for most of the fund managers who seek instead to implement wider European strategies. And therefore, we have seen that not a lot of players in Europe want to access to Italy, because as of today, there are not specific tax incentive for European investors to invest within the Italian territory. So my view, to truly flourish, we need a more focused national policy that aligns with the EU ELTIFs 2.0 framework.
Very clear. Stefan, how would you talk about this proposition from a French angle?
To build on what Salvatore just said, because I think we also have in France some tax incentive framework which is independent from ELTIF in some respect. We have life insurance units, there are retirement plans, and in both cases we had evolution in the laws to actually take into account ELTIF as one of the eligible support in these tax incentive schemes. So I think it's a very good step forward to promote this type of investments, and ELTIF is a building block in that respect. Now, what we are thinking about is the type of reciprocity that we could have throughout Europe, meaning that we can imagine other countries trying to promote ELTIF at national level. What would be great is to actually have more reciprocity, in the sense that French ELTIF could be eligible to other schemes elsewhere, and other ELTIF somewhere in Europe can be eligible to French schemes. This type of reciprocity would definitely help the market as a whole. So yes, European has done a lot of work and significant work on the ELTIF revision that goes definitely in the right direction. And I fully agree with what Salvatore said on the the fact that all these revisions helps, and the evergreen features in particular, because when you start to have this type of products on an evergreen format, it needs to be in a very secured framework in which we are all comfortable with, and that's probably a key point of promotion. But now that Europe has done its part at national levels, and France has done good initiative, but how can we make it both ways with different countries that will probably leverage on the ELTIF classification to promote long-term investments as well.
Mm-hmm. Jocelyn, can I ask you? There's a next proposition which I know you're very enthusiastic to talk about, which is the following: the ELTIF brand will attract investors from outside of Europe as well.
Yes, I think absolutely there will be interest from investors outside of Europe, and particularly with the features that Salvatore mentioned earlier. If you look on the whole at what has evolved in the product creation space and the shift into evergreen product more generally, which we see over the past 12 to 18 months, really a market shift in the market toward this type of product, which is really created specifically to access the private wealth channel or the individual investor who wants to be invested quickly, stay invested for the longer term potentially, and also have some potential windows of liquidity. So if you take those features, which are now available in an ELTIF, and you create a product around that, I think that becomes a very attractive proposition holistically, not only for investors in Europe. If you look at APAC in particular, Asia Pacific region, which is a very large capital base for capital raising from individual investors, the product being regulated often now in a Luxembourg wrapper or type of vehicle, like a CCAV, similar to a UCITS product. It's familiar, it's historically understood, well understood product, and I think these features of the ELTIF 2.0 make that product more and more like a mutual fund, more and more like a UCITS product. So I think there is a lot of potential, and even I think industry groups are starting to look into what types of bilateral agreements could be put into place between the EU and maybe markets like Switzerland or Singapore in order to have reciprocity and have those countries' retail investors also adopt the product. So I think the key really will be in making a competitive product in an ELTIF wrapper from a portfolio composition perspective, making the return profile still attractive, whilst also giving investors that opportunity for investing capital paid up, and potentially having some liquidity opportunity.
Okay. If you, Jocelyn, if you could stay on the next proposition, which might be a bit more controversial or not, we'll see, which is the following: distribution of ELTIFs will mostly be done through private banks, and then only to their high net worth individual clients. What do you think of that?
I think the attraction of the ELTIF, and remember, this is a product where, you can have a passport to access non-professional investors across the EU. So, there are other products which are still sort of ultra high net worth targeted. And I think, the attraction of the ELTIF is that a bank would be able to offer this product to a broader base of clients, and take the bank's full book of clients and offer them a private markets opportunity. So I think while other products will still be very marketable for ultra high net worth and high net worth investors, and especially drawdown products and very sophisticated types of investors that are still looking for very high alpha product. I think the ELTIF really will allow banks to dip down into this class of mass affluent types of clients. And so I think the proposition then becomes, how do you operationalize such a product for a high volume of individual investors? How do you give them an investment experience, which is one like they're used to, but still, giving credit to the private markets experience? And I think for that, technology is really key to being able to deliver these products to a larger volume of clients and to give them the right type of investment experience. So, at iCapital, we're really, this is our mission, which is to use technology to be able to streamline this experience for investors that are looking to invest into private markets through their client advisors and through their distribution channels. So I think the two, kind of how we operationalize the product and then how we deliver it to a broad base of clients, is going to be key.
Stefan, I know you're eager to say something about this as well.
Well, your statement around distribution of ELTIF, is it controversial? I don't know, but it's definitely interesting to think about, is it mostly being done by private banks? And truth is, when we started doing private markets for institutionals, even through ELTIF format, it was closed-end, it was capital calls, commitments, so an operational framework which is not really easy for small institutional investors. For sure, they did not have access to this market. And if you think about the ELTIF evergreen format, in which you can have monthly subscription or periodic subscription and periodic redemption windows with gate mechanism and a notice period, this means that you can enable a small institutional to have access to private markets. Private credit is a good example. If you want, in general, for a given level of risk, you get a higher yield than in public markets. So small institutionals could have interest into investing in ELTIF because they get exposed to this market with its own benefit. So I'm not sure that, well, it's a good news, but I'm not sure it's solely private banks that are going to distribute ELTIF. This could be very suited for small institutionals. And I would add one thing, because it's true that we're thinking about the emerged part of the iceberg, which is retail distribution, mass affluent, but small institutional is one angle, and there is a third angle on top of retail and small institutional. It's even large institutional investors that have been doing their private market investments through commitments, capital calls, commitment, capital calls, and you can have cash drags around it. What do you do with your cash? And actually, we are discussing with large institutionals saying, with this ELTIF format evergreen, you can reallocate when you have repayment, you have amortization, and you receive cash. What do you do with your cash? You want to be exposed to an asset class in the private side? There is an easy way to do that through the evergreen ELTIF format, for instance. So you could even argue that on top of mass affluent private banking distribution, you can have small institutional distribution and even large institutional distribution. So I'm a strong believer of this type of format to help democratize the asset class beyond the sole private banking channels.
On a slightly related topic, and maybe a question to you, Salvatore, because as we know, in UCITS, you have institutionals and retail investors investing, buying and selling next to each other. In private funds, we so far perhaps don't really see that. Institutionals and retailers don't really mix in typical closed-ended funds. But what's your experience with ELTIFs on that?
Yeah, so Peter, I totally agree with you, considering that as of today, it's very difficult to find ELTIFs invested by big institutional players. However, it is something that I really want to point out, because I'm a strong believer of what I will say, is that to further drive the growth of ELTIFs, I strongly believe that it's important to increase the institutional investor participation alongside retail investors. This for several reasons, because institutional involvement not only boosts the capital raised for us as asset managers, but also brings credibility to the fund, as these investors usually conduct rigorous due diligence on the fund and as well on the management company. And this reassures small retail investors. What I'm saying is as well coming from something that we did in the recent past. So we launched a private credit fund where a major Italian institutional invested pari passo with the retail investors. Therefore, for every euro raised from our retail clients, the institutional investors match the contribution. And this co-investment model significantly enhanced the fund's capital and as well sent a strong message of trust to the market. I think that institutional participation foster on one side a sense of security, and as well on the other side encouraging more retailing clients to invest, because usually, as you know, and as well to continue what Peter, with Stefan, Jocelyn were mentioning before, in terms of distribution. So today, to accessing to retail investors, we have seen in Italy that it's fundamental to have consultants that are promoting this type of instruments. For example, we grow so fast because we had almost 2,000 financial advisors spread across the Italian territory that not only introduced on one side the ELTIF to them, but as well they played a crucial role in educating them, because they were familiar with UCITS funds, and this educational process has become critical to explain the specific benefit and the characteristic of the ELTIF. And knowing that there are institutional players that are investing pari passo with them is creating a completely new paradigm for those type of funds that, for what we have seen in the recent past, are not of a real interest for professional investors and as well institutions.
Right. Thanks. Let me up my game a bit in terms of trying to make controversial statements. So here's the next one. Investments with limited liquidity are simply not suitable for genuine retail investors. Jocelyn, would you care to take a stab at that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's probably mentioned on the previous panel, but one of the main controversies, of the new ELTIF 2.0 certainly was around the liquidity mechanisms. And if you look at the dialogue between the Commission and ESMA and the number of drafts that came out, it was certainly one of the top issues that had been addressed in the course of the drafting of the regulation. So the focus on liquidity is certainly something that I think from a regulatory perspective will be highly accounted for. And when sponsors are taking ELTIFs to be approved by the regulator, certainly there will be a lot of attention paid to liquidity mechanics and how they are disclosed as well to investors in the legal documents. So I think alongside that, it's really incumbent on every stakeholder in the industry that's involved in the sponsoring of the ELTIFs to also have a focus on educating the clients who will be maybe investing in private markets funds, not in their usual course of business. They may need to be advised and, for example, by local financial advisors, wealth managers, and others who are qualified to advise those clients. So, we adopt a B2B business model, which means we're taking out these products are really offered to a distributor, to a client advisor. So there is an intermediary in the process that is advising the end client, which I think is an important role in the distribution of these types of products. Also through, the technology platforms out there that are also intermediaries. We, for example, have education modules on our platform to help those distributors and advisors kind of bring life and educate their clients on the product. So I think education is really key around this, disclosure, and making sure that clients really do understand the concept of the limited liquidity.
Mm-hmm. Salvatore, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say that liquidity is the biggest issue that asset managers are facing. As you know, exiting from a closed-ended fund is nearly impossible unless the investor manages to sell their shares on a secondary market. This lack of liquidity can be a significant concern for those that instead were used for more flexible investment vehicle like UCITS. So finally, with ELTIF 2.0, there is the introduction of evergreen and semi-liquid funds that address this type of issue to some extent. And finally, there are mechanisms that allow for periodic redemption. Therefore, these funds finally provide liquidity windows where investors can redeem at specific intervals and offering a sort of degree of flexibility that usually closed-ended structure cannot. However, asset managers must approach this type of funds with caution, especially when managing liquidity. For me, this is a very sensitive topic because currently we are seeing several ELTIF structured as evergreen or semi-liquid products to be launched on the market. But we should remember that the underlying assets in which ELTIF invest, such as, for example, infrastructure, private equity, and real estate, remain illiquid, meaning that they do not generate regular liquidity to support frequent redemption. Therefore, the asset manager should carefully planning the liquidity pool in order to assure that the fund can meet redemption requests without destabilizing the portfolio or compromising the long-term investment strategy. On one side, the new mechanism are improving the liquidity, but on the other side, asset managers need to be vigilant because in times of financial stress or market disruption, mismatching in liquidity could lead to a situation where the fund becomes unsustainable and we are risking a liquidity crisis that on one side could erode the confidence coming from our investors and as well affecting the entire market.
Thank you. Stefan, what do you think? Limited liquidity assets?
Limited liquidity, is it not suitable for a genuine retail client base? Well, I'm not sure because real estate investments could be deemed as illiquid and you have retail access to this type of investments. But I do think investors need to, well, education was mentioned by Justin, but I'm here again a true believer of trying to be clear on what it is. What are we talking about? And it's not because it's in ELTIF that suddenly an illiquid investment becomes liquid. Definitely not. There is a trade-off between liquidity and return. And we should be very clear to investors that if you want to make this trade-off, you have a minimum holding period. Otherwise, you may be charged exit fees for the benefit of remaining investors. As well, if you want to redeem, you can have notice period, and it's not daily liquidity. And on top of that, there is gates mechanism that is not an option. It is in the mechanism itself. So there is education around that, but to the ultimate benefit of investors, because you are making a trade-off between liquidity and return in a framework that prevents the liquidity crisis. And I think it was mentioned by Jocelyn, but the discussions around technical standards, the back and forth between Commission and ESMA, translated the fact that, okay, how can we get comfortable with a framework where everybody would agree, not to constrain and constrain enough so that it makes we are making it clear that it's not a pure liquid instrument. It's not because you have liquidity windows that it is as liquid as the UCITS funds. It's an AIF. It's a classification of an AIF. So there is liquidity and it can be managed in a proper way with different tools. For instance, we mentioned a bucket of liquid instruments, but not only. You can have income yielding assets. If you do credit, you have redemption, you have income that you can use to manage redemptions. And in addition to that, with a new regulation, you can have revolving credit facility where you can slightly re-leverage to actually manage some redemptions up to a gate level. So there are mechanisms, and I think this not so liquid investment shall be offered to retail investors in a very secured framework. And it's precisely, I think, what we're trying to achieve with this revision of the ELTIF regulation. So it goes in the right direction here again, and I think it is adapted, but you need to be clear on what is behind. It's not as liquid as it is.
Clearly spoken. Thanks very much, Stefan. We get to the final proposition, which is only half a proposition, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the question is, could you finish the following sentence? The ELTIF 2.0 will be a success because, or if you will, the ELTIF 2.0 will be a success if. Jocelyn.
I think the ELTIF 2.0 will be a success because the industry is behind it. So remember, I mean, the ELTIF has always had, and I don't think its mission has really changed, which is more or less to promote and stimulate investment in long-term investments in the real economy in the EU. And this iteration, this new look at the ELTIF, I think is a very is a chance really for the whole industry to gather and really lead its adoption into the market. So I think there is a lot of, both from industry groups as well as sponsors of ELTIFs, as well as buyers of ELTIFs, all around there has been a lot of anticipation. And it happens to come at a time when value creation in private markets is a huge opportunity, and there are a lot of stakeholders out there in the market who want to diversify into this space. So I think it will be a success.
Okay, Salvatore, how about you?
So for me, ELTIF 2.0 will succeed because it represents finally a significant step forward in making private markets accessible to a broader range of investors. It is the first time that we are seeing retail investors have structured access to long-term investments that were once the exclusive domain of institutional players. In the past 2 years, we have been hearing about democratization of private market. I think that already we moved one step forward. I would like, let's say, to call this new step the mutualization of private markets. So it's now about creating this ecosystem where institutional and retail investors can participate side by side.
Very good. Stefan, the ELTIF 2.0 will be a success because
the economy is increasingly being financed by private markets. And I think it started with the disintermediation trend. And if you look at what is happening today, you see a lot of initiatives being financed by private equity. You see a lot of initiatives requiring money by private debt markets. So it's not necessarily IPOs that helps companies outside the banking system. It's not only bond issuance that helps companies. It's direct lending, it's private equity. So because we have this trend, ELTIF will be a success because it is supporting this trend. So we have to to put in perspective with the fact that there is a reason behind it. And if the Commission wants it to be a success, it's because we are seeing it as a vehicle to help financing the economy. It is a requirement. And how do we want it to be organized to be a success? So we need to have a framework which is secured, which can be actually promoted beyond Europe, because Justin was right. In Asia, we received a lot of questions around, oh, what is this ELTIF label? How does it work? Because it gives a framework in which you can access to these markets that were usually untapped by most investors. So yes, it will be a success because it is just part of a trend.
Thank you. Thanks very much. This concludes the part of the propositions and the talking around those. And then thanks again very much for your input. We do have some questions from the audience. I think a couple of them may have already been answered, but a couple could do with a bit of further digging out. Let me put them to you, and you can take them at will. One of them is about secondary markets. So there's actually two questions around it. One question is, apart from stock exchange, do you see any routes to build a material secondary market for the ELTIFs? And the other, slightly related, is do you think there will be a matching mechanism under the new regime? And do you think that ELTIF managers have an appetite to set those up?
So maybe, Peter, I take the one regarding the secondary market. So as of today, as you know, on ELTIF especially, let's say, we do not have a strong secondary market open. One thing that, of course, can enlarge this possibility is as well the tokenization. So, for example, we as well tokenize the share classes of some ELTIFs. So we prove that technology works, but unfortunately, it will not work until, let's say, a secondary market will exist. Because as of today, as you know, investors are subscribing, and there will be a transfer agent or a distributor that will register the position, or having, let's say, a physical token doesn't change, since there is no one that is actively trading those positions, because as well there will be then discussion regarding at which valuations you are trading, because as you know better than me, usually on secondary markets, the transactions are occurring at a discounts versus the current NAV. We have seen as well a strong effort, for example, as well in Luxembourg, where traditional exchange like Deutsche Börse with Clearstream are doing massive investments as well on the alternative side, where I really believe that this will create a sort of confidence on the market, because of course are players that are already well known in the industry, and therefore expanding the type of assets that they can propose to their clients. It will be, of course, a significant boost for the economy, and especially for ELTIFs.
Thank you. Thanks. Another sort of related question is, how do we see the role of technology in these secondary markets? Is that something, Jocelyn, you may have a particular view on?
So I think Salvatore referred to, tokenization as being one buzzword or topic, right, that often comes up in relation to secondary markets and technology. Tokenization, I think, is, kind of a means, and I would say, it does, in a way, change the offering of the underlying, right, into, some format, which becomes more readily tradable due to technological improvements, such as, digital ledger technology or blockchain underlying it. So technology, I would say, can be an amplifier or a means to enhance a methodology of trading or of offering, but I think what can't be overlooked or forgotten is that at the end of the day, you do have an underlying product and assets underlying it. And so, you know, one has to be conscious of, you know, how much offering that through a different methodology changes the, you know, the actual underlying product. So I would, you know, I think that that's one to be seen, certainly, and I think quite a topic in the industry that's being taken up.
Yep. I think a related question also about distribution that we see is what do we think of the collaboration between non-bank asset managers and banks when it comes to distribution? Do we expect that collaboration will increase? I would certainly expect that. Stefan, any point of view from your side?
Yeah, collaboration should increase between non-bank asset managers if they're very specialized and they come with a particular expertise. That could be interesting for banks to work with them because banks can originate, can have a network, and that would definitely help. For instance, for distribution, say, I mean, you give your client access to specialized asset manager in private market, that could definitely help. But as a broader trend, you are seeing actually banks even taking stakes in asset managers. You are seeing insurance companies merging or being closed from asset management and banks. So you try to have the full chain between capital, distribution, and management. And that's probably a big trend for the year to come, this type of partnerships between banks, asset managers, and insurance companies.
All right. Good. Well, I think that looking at the questions we discussed, that rounds it up as far as we're concerned. A bit before time, but I think that's okay. Gwen, can I hand over to you for some closing remarks?
You can, of course, yeah, and thank you so much for that. That was fantastic. So hi again to everybody in the audience, and thank you for joining us here today on our webinar. So for those who have made it to the end of the webinar today, thanks again for joining the discussion. We had a very enlightening afternoon where we benefited from a range of different expertise and perspectives on the new ELTIF regime. Our experts today have explained how the new ELTIF can provide an interesting bridge between retail investors, institutional investors, and long-term projects in need of financing. This provides new opportunities for financial returns to investors while generating a positive societal impact by providing finance to infrastructure projects, SMEs, and digital and green transition initiatives. This, we hope, will make a difference in Europe's real economy. Before finishing our session today, it's important to keep in mind that the ELTIF landscape will continue to evolve now that we have the full suite of regulation almost in place. For those of you who wish to stay informed and involved in the ELTIF scene, please feel free to reach out to us at eltif-manager@efama.org, as well as to consult our ELTIF FAQ, which we'll be updating on a regular basis, and it's freely available on our website. I would like to finally thank all of our experts who generously lent their time to us today to share their expertise and to contribute to the discussion around the role that ELTIFs can play in fostering long-term investment. For your benefit, we'll be making the recording of this webinar available to all registered attendees in due course. We look forward to keeping you updated in this space and wish you a fantastic day. Thank you and goodbye to everybody.